Hello there. If you're here, then perhaps you're ready to let your thoughts slow down, to rest, to drift, maybe even fall asleep. But not quite yet. Because before you do, I'd like to take you somewhere else for a little while. Not far, just far enough. Close your eyes if you like and imagine. You're stepping into a world where death lurks in every shadow and survival depends on skills you've never developed. Where the romanticised Viking warriors of modern imagination give way to a brutal reality of constant violence, starvation, and environmental extremes that would kill you within hours. Welcome to Scandinavia, roughly 793 to 1066 CE, where the Viking Age wasn't about heroic adventures and noble warriors, but about surviving in conditions so harsh that simply waking up each morning represented a victory against forces designed to eliminate the weak, the unprepared, and the unlucky. This is a journey into frozen wastelands where summer lasts mere weeks, and winter darkness stretches for months, into communities where raiding and warfare aren't romantic adventures, but desperate survival strategies, into a time when your value as a human being was measured entirely by your ability to fight, work, and survive in conditions that would challenge modern special forces equipped with advanced technology and survival training. So before we begin, make sure to like this video if you enjoy learning about history's most unforgiving realities, and subscribe for more content that reveals the brutal truth behind romanticised historical periods. Hit that notification bell too, because we're constantly uploading new stories about humanity's struggle against impossible odds. Tonight, we're exploring the harsh reality of Viking Age life, not the sanitised adventures of television and movies, but the daily struggle for survival that defined existence in medieval Scandinavia. You'll discover why the climate alone would probably kill you, why Viking society had no place for weakness or hesitation, and how the magnificent seafaring culture that we admire today was built on foundations of violence, environmental adaptation, and social structures that would horrify modern sensibilities. So settle in, let your mind wander back through the centuries, and prepare to understand why surviving even a single day in the Viking Age would require skills, knowledge, and physical capabilities that most modern people simply don't possess. Your death in the Viking Age would most likely begin with your complete inability to survive the environmental conditions that define medieval Scandinavia, where temperatures, weather patterns, and seasonal extremes create a climate so hostile to human survival that even the Vikings, who spent their entire lives adapting to these conditions, faced constant threats from cold, starvation, and weather-related disasters that killed thousands every year. The winter conditions that dominate Viking Age Scandinavia for 8 months of every year create environmental challenges that would overwhelm your modern physiology within hours of exposure. The temperatures that define Viking winter regularly drop to levels that cause frostbite and hypothermia in minutes, while the wind-chill effects of Arctic storms can create effective temperatures that freeze exposed skin instantly, causing permanent damage that leads to gangrene and amputation for those fortunate enough to survive the initial exposure. Your modern clothing, designed for heated indoor environments and brief outdoor exposure, provides essentially no protection against Viking Age cold that penetrates through multiple layers of wool and fur while creating wind conditions that strip heat from your body faster than you can generate it. The insulation systems that Vikings developed through centuries of trial and error require specific materials, construction techniques, and layering strategies that you don't understand, while your modern synthetic fabrics become brittle and useless in extreme cold conditions. The hypothermia that would begin affecting you within minutes of cold exposure creates progressive mental impairment that prevents rational decision-making precisely when survival depends on clear thinking and appropriate responses to environmental threats. The cognitive effects of hypothermia include confusion, poor judgment, and eventual loss of consciousness, while your body shuts down non-essential functions in a futile attempt to preserve core temperature that will inevitably fail without immediate intervention. Your modern diet and physical conditioning leave you completely unprepared for the caloric demands of maintaining body temperature in Viking Age cold, while your lack of cold adaptation means that your body burns through energy reserves attempting to generate heat, Through shivering and increased metabolism, the energy requirements for cold weather survival exceed normal food intake by enormous margins, while the high-fat, high-protein Viking diet that enables cold survival remains unfamiliar and potentially indigestible for your modern digestive system. The shelter construction techniques that enable Viking survival require knowledge of building materials, insulation methods, and heating systems that you lack, while the tools and skills necessary for constructing adequate winter housing demand years of experience that cannot be acquired during emergency situations. Your inability to build appropriate shelter ensures exposure to killing cold, while the modern heating systems you depend on simply don't exist in Viking Age Scandinavia. The fuel requirements for maintaining life-sustaining heat throughout Viking winter exceed your ability to gather, process, and store wood, while the competing demands of cooking, heating, and essential crafts create impossible choices about energy allocation that determine survival outcomes. The wood gathering that enables winter survival requires specialized tools, knowledge of forest management, and physical capabilities that modern people lack, while the labor demands of fuel collection compete with other essential survival activities. The daylight deprivation that characterizes Viking winter creates psychological problems, including seasonal depression and disorientation, while the extended darkness interferes with sleep patterns and daily activities that require visual coordination. The psychological effects of winter darkness compound physical survival challenges while creating mental health problems that interfere with survival decision-making and social cooperation that becomes essential during crisis periods. The wind patterns that affect Viking Age Scandinavia create weather conditions that multiply the killing effects of cold, while generating storms that can last for days or weeks, trapping people in inadequate shelters without sufficient fuel, food or water for extended survival. The wind exposure that characterizes Viking territory strips heat from buildings and people, while creating structural damage that compromises shelter integrity during the periods when effective shelter becomes most critical for survival. The precipitation patterns that govern Viking climate include snow accumulations that can trap communities for months, while creating water access problems when normal sources freeze solid and become unreachable. The snow conditions that define Viking winter make travel impossible, while eliminating access to resources that might enable survival during extended isolation periods that test community preparation and resource management capabilities. The seasonal transition periods that connect Viking summer and winter create additional survival challenges as rapidly changing weather conditions require constant adaptation, while the brief growing seasons provide limited opportunities for food production and resource gathering that must sustain communities through 8-month winter periods. The transition periods create windows of vulnerability when communities must accomplish essential preparation tasks, while weather conditions remain unpredictable and dangerous. The indoor air quality that results from heating poorly ventilated Viking shelters creates respiratory problems, while the smoke and carbon monoxide produced by heating fires cause chronic health problems that weaken Viking populations and make them more vulnerable to other health threats. The ventilation challenges that affect Viking buildings create trade-offs between maintaining heat and preventing smoke poisoning that require technical knowledge and construction skills that you lack. The water access problems that emerge during Viking winter include frozen wells and streams, while the energy requirements for melting snow and ice compete with other essential fuel uses that determine survival outcomes. The water procurement challenges that affect Viking communities require ice-cutting tools and techniques, while the contamination risks from melted snow create additional health hazards during periods when medical care remains unavailable. Your survival in the Viking Age would depend entirely on your ability to procure, preserve, and allocate food resources in quantities sufficient to sustain life through extended periods when hunting, fishing, and farming become impossible due to weather conditions that eliminate food production for most of the year. The food scarcity that defines Viking existence creates nutrition crises that kill through starvation, malnutrition, and the diseases that flourish when immune systems are weakened by inadequate caloric intake and poor nutritional quality. The agricultural limitations that constrain Viking food production include short growing seasons, that provide only 3 to 4 months for crop cultivation, while the poor soil quality and harsh climate conditions prevent reliable harvests that could sustain communities through winter months. The farming techniques available to Viking communities require extensive knowledge of cold climate agriculture, while the crop varieties that can survive in northern conditions provide minimal caloric yields compared to temperate agriculture that supports larger populations. Your modern understanding of nutrition and food safety would prove completely inadequate for Viking Age survival that requires consuming foods that modern people would consider inedible or dangerous, while the preservation methods that enable winter survival create foods that are barely palatable but essential for preventing starvation. The preserved foods that sustain Viking communities include fish that has been fermented to the point of toxicity, meat that has been dried until it becomes almost indigestible, and dairy products that have been processed into forms that modern palates find revolting. The hunting skills that provide essential protein for Viking survival require expertise with weapons, tracking techniques, and animal behaviour knowledge that take decades to develop, while the physical demands of hunting in Arctic conditions exceed the capabilities of modern people who lack cold weather endurance and specialised equipment. The hunting success rates that determine community survival depend on skills that you don't possess, while the dangerous animals that provide the largest protein yields can kill inexperienced hunters who lack proper equipment and knowledge. The fishing techniques that support Viking coastal communities require specialised knowledge of seasonal fish migrations, weather patterns, and ocean conditions, while the dangerous maritime environment of North Atlantic fishing creates mortality rates that eliminate significant portions of fishing populations annually. The fishing equipment that enables Viking survival includes nets, traps, and boats that require specialised construction techniques, while the processing methods that preserve fish catches demand knowledge of salt curing, smoking, and fermentation that prevent spoilage during storage. The food preservation methods that enable Viking winter survival require technical knowledge of bacterial control, moisture management, and storage techniques, while the preservation failures that result from inadequate knowledge create food spoilage that can eliminate entire winter food supplies and cause community-wide starvation. The preservation techniques that Vikings employ include methods that would horrify modern food safety standards while producing foods that remain technically edible but nutritionally inadequate and potentially dangerous. The caloric requirements for Viking Age survival exceed modern dietary expectations by enormous margins, while the high energy demands of cold weather survival, physical labour, and constant activity require food intake levels that modern people cannot sustain. The energy expenditure that characterises Viking life includes heating the body through metabolism, performing physically demanding labour in harsh conditions, and maintaining activity levels that ensure survival during emergencies that require immediate physical response. The seasonal famine cycles that affect Viking communities create predictable periods when food supplies become inadequate, while the timing of harvest failures or preservation disasters can create starvation conditions that eliminate entire communities during particularly harsh winters. The famine periods that mark Viking existence require rationing strategies and community cooperation, while the social tensions that develop during food shortages can destroy the cooperation that enables community survival. The nutritional deficiencies that result from limited food variety and poor preservation methods create health problems including scurvy, rickets, and other diseases that weaken Viking populations while making them more vulnerable to infections and injuries that might be survivable under better nutritional conditions. The vitamin deficiencies that affect Viking diets create chronic health problems, while the limited food variety ensures that essential nutrients remain unavailable for significant portions of the year. The food storage challenges that affect Viking communities include protecting food supplies from rodents, insects, and moisture, while the storage methods that preserve food through winter months require construction techniques and materials that modern people don't understand. The storage failures that destroy winter food supplies create immediate survival crises, while the competition between humans and animals for stored food requires constant vigilance and protective measures. The cooking methods available to Viking communities require fuel expenditure that competes with heating needs, while the preparation techniques that make preserved foods edible demand time and energy that must be allocated carefully during survival periods. The cooking challenges that affect Viking food preparation include creating meals that provide adequate nutrition while conserving fuel and ingredients that must last through extended winter periods. The water quality issues that affect Viking communities include contamination from animal waste and human sewage, while the limited water sources that remain unfrozen during winter require careful management to prevent depletion. The water procurement that enables Viking survival requires breaking through ice and transporting water under dangerous conditions, while the contamination risks create additional health hazards during periods when medical care remains unavailable. Your survival in Viking society would depend on your ability to navigate a culture where violence permeates every aspect of daily life. While personal safety requires combat skills, weapons proficiency, and social positioning that determine whether you become a protector or a victim in communities organised around warfare, raiding, and the constant threat of death through armed conflict. The normalisation of violence in Viking culture creates social environments where your failure to demonstrate martial capability marks you for exploitation, abuse, or elimination by individuals and groups whose status depends on their ability to dominate others through force. The warrior culture that defines Viking society creates social hierarchies based entirely on combat ability and willingness to engage in violence, while your modern aversion to physical conflict and lack of weapons training would immediately mark you as a target for those seeking to establish dominance through intimidation and assault. The social dynamics that govern Viking communities treat violence as a legitimate method for resolving disputes while rewarding aggressive behaviour that modern legal systems would classify as criminal assault, battery, and murder. The weapon skills that determine survival in Viking society require decades of training and physical conditioning that modern people lack, while the proficiency with swords, axes, spears and shields demands muscle memory and combat reflexes that can only be developed through years of practice and real combat experience. The weapon handling that Vikings consider basic competency includes techniques for killing efficiently, while the combat psychology that enables effective fighting in life or death situations remains foreign to modern people who have never faced mortal combat. The raiding economy that supports Viking communities depends on systematic violence against neighbouring populations, while the wealth distribution that maintains Viking society comes from successful warfare that brings slaves, treasure and resources extracted through conquest and plunder. The economic systems that enable Viking prosperity require participation in violent enterprises, while the social status that determines quality of life correlates directly with success in warfare and raiding activities that modern people would find morally unacceptable. The honour culture that governs Viking social interactions treats reputation for violence as essential for social survival, while the concepts of personal honour that motivate Viking behaviour require willingness to fight and die over insults, property disputes, and social slights that modern people would resolve through legal systems or social mediation. The honour-based conflicts that characterise Viking society create cycles of violence where failure to respond to challenges with immediate physical force results in social death and eventual physical elimination. The blood feuds that define Viking justice systems create intergenerational conflicts where violence breeds more violence, while the legal frameworks that govern dispute resolution emphasise retaliation and compensation rather than rehabilitation or conflict prevention. The feud cycles that affect Viking communities ensure that violence remains constant, while the obligation to avenge family honour creates social pressures that force participation in conflicts regardless of personal preferences or moral objections. The slavery systems that support Viking economy depend on violence for procurement of human property, while the slave raids that provide essential labour require participation in warfare that captures, transports, and manages human beings as commodities. The slave-based economy that enables Viking prosperity treats human trafficking as normal business activity, while the violence required to maintain slave populations creates social environments where brutality becomes routine and unremarkable. The training systems that prepare Viking children for adult participation in warrior culture begin in early childhood, while the education that Viking youth receive emphasises combat skills, weapons proficiency, and psychological conditioning for violence that modern child development experts would classify as abusive and harmful. The childhood preparation for warrior status includes exposure to graphic violence and participation in activities that would traumatise modern children while creating psychological adaptation to brutality. The gender roles that define Viking society include expectations for male violence, while the masculine identity that Viking culture promotes requires demonstration of fighting ability and willingness to kill as proof of adult status. The masculine ideals that govern Viking men treat non-violence as evidence of weakness, while the social pressure to engage in combat creates environments where peaceful resolution of conflicts becomes impossible and socially unacceptable. The legal systems that govern Viking communities treat violence as a legitimate tool for dispute resolution, while the court procedures that address conflicts often involve combat trials, where physical strength determines legal outcomes rather than evidence or justice. The judicial violence that characterises Viking law includes trial by combat and other procedures that ensure violent outcomes, while eliminating legal protections for individuals who cannot defend themselves through force. The religious beliefs that motivate Viking behaviour include concepts of afterlife, rewards for death in combat, while the spiritual systems that guide Viking decision-making treat violence as religiously mandated activity that earns divine favour and ensures positive outcomes after death. The religious violence that characterises Viking spirituality creates divine imperatives for warfare, while treating peaceful death as spiritually inadequate and socially shameful. The community defence requirements that affect all Viking settlements include obligations for military service, while the survival of Viking communities depends on the ability to repel attacks from raiders, neighbouring tribes and organised armies that threaten community existence. The defensive violence that protects Viking settlements requires universal participation in warfare, while the community survival strategies treat non-combatants as liabilities that endanger group security. Your encounter with Viking-age disease would expose you to medical conditions and treatment methods that would kill you through infection, blood poisoning, and medical interventions that cause more harm than the original health problems they attempt to address. The primitive medical knowledge available to Viking healers remains utterly inadequate for treating serious injuries and diseases, while the unsanitary conditions that characterise Viking life create ideal environments for epidemic diseases that kill significant portions of populations regularly. The bacterial infections that flourish in Viking communities include diseases that modern antibiotics could easily cure, but that prove invariably fatal in societies without understanding of bacterial causation or effective antimicrobial treatments. The wound infections that result from combat injuries, work accidents, and surgical procedures create blood poisoning that kills through sepsis, while the infected individuals suffer through weeks of agony before dying from systemic organ failure that Viking medicine cannot prevent or treat. The surgical procedures available to Viking healers include amputations, wound closure, and other invasive treatments performed without anaesthesia, antiseptic techniques, or understanding of anatomy that ensures most surgical interventions result in complications that prove more dangerous than the original injuries. The surgical mortality rates among Viking populations approach 100% for serious procedures, while the pain and trauma of unanesthetized surgery creates psychological damage that affects survivors who live through these primitive medical interventions. The dental problems that affect Viking populations include tooth decay, abscesses, and jaw infections that cause excruciating pain while spreading bacteria throughout the body and creating systemic infections that kill through blood poisoning and brain abscesses. The dental treatments available to Vikings include tooth extraction, using primitive tools, while the oral infections that develop in populations with poor dental hygiene create chronic pain and eventual death from complications that could be prevented with basic modern dental care. The parasitic infections that flourish in Viking communities include intestinal worms, lice, fleas, and other parasites that drain nutrients from already malnourished populations, while transmitting diseases that cause chronic illness and eventual death. The parasite loads that affect Viking individuals include multiple species that compete for nutrients, while creating digestive problems and immune system damage that makes hosts vulnerable to other infections and diseases. The respiratory diseases that spread through Viking communities include tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other lung infections that prove invariably fatal in populations without effective treatments, while the overcrowded living conditions that characterize Viking settlements create ideal transmission environments for airborne diseases. The respiratory mortality that affects Viking populations includes deaths from diseases that modern medicine treats routinely, while the lung damage from smoke-filled buildings creates chronic breathing problems that worsen over time. The nutritional diseases that result from inadequate diet include scurvy, rickets, and other vitamin deficiency conditions that create permanent disability and eventual death, while the limited food variety available to Viking communities ensures that essential nutrients remain unavailable for significant portions of the population. The malnutrition that affects Viking individuals creates immune system depression that makes populations vulnerable to diseases that well-nourished individuals could survive. The obstetric complications that affect Viking women include birth difficulties that prove fatal for both mothers and infants, while the lack of medical knowledge about pregnancy and childbirth creates maternal mortality rates that approach levels found in modern disaster zones. The childbirth procedures available to Viking women include interventions that often cause more harm than natural birth, while the obstetric complications that develop during difficult deliveries cannot be resolved using Viking medical knowledge. The mental health problems that affect Viking populations include conditions that result from trauma, brain injuries, and neurological diseases, while the treatments available for psychological disorders involve supernatural explanations and interventions that provide no therapeutic benefit. The mental illness that affects Viking individuals often results in social ostracism and abandonment, while the lack of understanding about psychological conditions ensures that mental health problems remain untreated and often worsen over time. The epidemic diseases that periodically devastate Viking communities include smallpox, plague, and other infectious diseases that kill significant portions of populations, while the lack of immunity and medical knowledge ensures that epidemics spread rapidly through communities without effective prevention or treatment. The epidemic mortality that affects Viking settlements can eliminate entire communities, while the social disruption caused by mass mortality destroys the social systems that enable community survival. The injury treatments available to Viking healers include wound care techniques that often introduce additional infections, while the lack of understanding about proper wound cleaning and closure ensures that minor injuries often develop into life-threatening complications. The wound care that Vikings practice includes techniques that would horrify modern medical professionals, while the infection rates from treated injuries approach levels that make medical intervention more dangerous than leaving injuries untreated. The pharmacological knowledge available to Viking healers includes herbal remedies that provide minimal therapeutic benefit, while often causing additional health problems through toxic side effects and drug interactions that Viking medicine doesn't understand. The medication that Vikings use includes preparations that may cause liver damage, kidney failure, and other serious complications while providing little or no relief for the conditions they're intended to treat. Your position in Viking social hierarchy would determine every aspect of your survival prospects, while the rigid class system that governs Viking society creates conditions where your birth status, family connections, and personal capabilities determine whether you live in relative comfort or die in poverty and abandonment. The social stratification that defines Viking communities treats human worth as inherently unequal, while creating systems of exploitation and oppression that ensure the majority of people exist in conditions of perpetual vulnerability and insecurity. The Jarl class that occupies the apex of Viking society controls resources, land, and human labour, while making life and death decisions about resource allocation during times of scarcity when survival depends on access to food, shelter, and protection that remain available only to those with social status. The aristocratic families that rule Viking communities treat lower-class lives as expendable, while prioritising their own survival, and comfort during crises that eliminate significant portions of lower-class populations. The Carl class that forms the middle tier of Viking society includes free farmers and craftsmen, whose survival depends on their ability to maintain productive capacity while paying tribute and providing services to their social superiors. The middle-class status that Carls enjoy requires constant vigilance to prevent social demotion, while the economic pressures that affect this class create vulnerability to debt bondage and eventual enslavement during periods of economic hardship or crop failure. The thrall class that forms the foundation of Viking society consists of slaves, whose survival depends entirely on their economic value to owners who view them as property rather than human beings deserving of basic care and protection. The slave status that affects significant portions of Viking populations creates conditions where individuals have no rights, no protection from abuse, and no guarantee of survival when their economic productivity declines due to age, injury, or illness. The social mobility that exists within Viking society requires exceptional achievement in warfare, crafts, or trade, while the opportunities for advancement remain extremely limited and dependent on circumstances beyond individual control. The class advancement that some individuals achieve often requires participation in activities that modern people would find morally unacceptable, while the social barriers that prevent mobility ensure that most people remain trapped in the social positions they inherit at birth. The family connections that determine social status include kinship networks that provide protection and resources, while individuals without powerful family support remain vulnerable to exploitation and violence from those with better social connections. The clan relationships that govern Viking society create obligations and opportunities that determine survival outcomes, while the family feuds that characterize Viking politics can destroy entire kinship networks through cycles of violence and retaliation. The economic dependencies that affect lower-class Vikings include debt relationships and service obligations that create conditions resembling modern economic slavery, while the inability to achieve economic independence ensures perpetual vulnerability to exploitation by social superiors. The economic relationships that govern Viking society treat labour as a commodity, while the workers who provide essential services receive minimal compensation and no protection from economic abuse. The legal protections available to Vikings vary dramatically by social class, while the justice systems that govern disputes provide extensive rights to aristocrats and minimal protection to lower-class individuals whose testimony receives less credibility and whose injuries merit smaller compensation. The legal inequality that characterizes Viking society ensures that crimes against lower-class victims receive minimal punishment, while crimes against aristocrats result in severe penalties that may include death or permanent exile. The resource allocation systems that distribute food, shelter, and other necessities prioritize aristocratic needs while treating lower-class survival as secondary to maintaining upper-class comfort and luxury. The resource distribution that occurs during times of scarcity ensures that aristocrats maintain adequate nutrition and shelter, while lower-class individuals face starvation and exposure that may prove fatal during extended crisis periods. The military obligations that affect all social classes include service requirements that force participation in dangerous warfare, while the combat roles assigned to different classes ensure that lower-class individuals face higher mortality rates and receive smaller shares of plunder and rewards. The military service that Vikings must provide includes obligations that may require years of dangerous activity, while the benefits of successful warfare flow primarily to aristocratic leaders who organize and command military operations. The marriage arrangements that govern Viking family formation reflect social status, while the partnership opportunities available to different classes create relationships that either improve or worsen individual survival prospects. The marriage systems that affect Viking society include arrangements that may improve social status and economic security, or create additional burdens and vulnerabilities, depending on family background and social connections. The educational opportunities that enable skill development remain limited to individuals with aristocratic status, while the knowledge transfer that occurs within Viking society ensures that essential skills remain concentrated among upper-class families who control access to technical knowledge and professional training. The educational restrictions that affect lower-class Vikings prevent social advancement while ensuring that economic opportunities remain limited to individuals with appropriate family backgrounds. Your survival during Viking Age sea voyages would depend on nautical skills and ocean knowledge that require decades of experience, while the primitive navigation techniques and inadequate safety equipment that characterize Viking seafaring create mortality rates that eliminate significant portions of crews during routine voyages to familiar destinations. The maritime environment that Vikings must navigate includes weather conditions, ocean hazards, and navigational challenges that would overwhelm modern recreational sailors, despite their advanced equipment and safety technologies. The ship construction techniques that create Viking vessels produce boats that are seaworthy, but lack the safety features and structural redundancy that modern ship design includes to prevent catastrophic failure during storms and heavy weather conditions. The wooden ships that Vikings use for exploration and trade remain vulnerable to structural damage that can cause rapid sinking, while the lack of watertight compartments ensures that hull breaches result in total vessel loss rather than controlled flooding that might enable survival. The navigation methods available to Viking sailors include celestial observation and dead reckoning techniques that require extensive knowledge and experience, while providing limited accuracy under the cloudy conditions that characterize North Atlantic weather patterns. The navigational knowledge that enables Viking exploration demands understanding of star positions, seasonal variations, and ocean currents, while the navigation errors that result from primitive techniques can lead ships hundreds of miles off course into dangerous waters or away from safe harbours. The weather forecasting capabilities available to Viking sailors include only basic observation of immediate conditions, while the storm systems that develop in North Atlantic waters can change rapidly and create life-threatening conditions without warning. The weather prediction that Vikings use provides minimal advance notice of dangerous storms, while the severe weather that affects northern waters includes conditions that can sink ships and kill crews within hours of storm development. The safety equipment available on Viking ships includes only basic tools for emergency situations, while the rescue capabilities that modern vessels depend on simply don't exist in Viking Age seafaring technology. The emergency procedures that Viking crews can implement include limited options for dealing with catastrophic situations, while the survival equipment that ships carry provides minimal protection against drowning, exposure, and other hazards that develop during maritime emergencies. The crew training that prepares Viking sailors for ocean voyages includes practical experience, but lacks systematic instruction in emergency procedures and safety protocols, while the knowledge transfer that occurs within Viking seafaring communities depends on informal apprenticeship systems that may not cover all essential skills. The sailing expertise that Viking crews possess develops through trial and error, while the learning process includes experiences that may prove fatal for individuals who lack adequate preparation. The provisioning challenges that affect Viking voyages include limited food storage and water capacity, while the preservation methods that maintain supplies during extended voyages create foods that become increasingly inedible and nutritionally inadequate over time. The supply planning that enables Viking exploration requires careful calculation of voyage duration and consumption rates, while the provisioning failures that result from poor planning can cause starvation and dehydration that prove fatal before ships reach their destinations. The ocean hazards that Viking sailors encounter include hidden rocks, changing tides, and ice conditions, while the coastal navigation that characterizes much Viking sailing requires detailed knowledge of the local hazards that can destroy ships and kill crews when navigation errors place vessels in dangerous waters. The maritime hazards that affect Viking waters include conditions that change seasonally, while the local knowledge required for safe navigation takes years to acquire and remains vulnerable to weather conditions that alter familiar landmarks. The shipwreck survival that becomes necessary when Viking vessels are lost at sea requires swimming abilities and cold water survival skills that most crew members lack, while the rescue prospects for shipwreck victims remain virtually non-existent in waters where other ships are rare and communication systems don't exist. The survival chances for Viking sailors who survive initial shipwrecks remain minimal, while the cold water and harsh conditions that characterize northern waters kill most shipwreck victims within hours of vessel loss. The piracy and warfare that affect Viking shipping include attacks from rival groups and hostile populations, while the defensive capabilities of merchant vessels remain limited against organised attacks by groups seeking to capture ships, cargo, and crews for slavery or ransom. The maritime warfare that affects Viking trade includes systematic piracy that treats merchant shipping as legitimate targets, while the crew mortality from piracy attacks includes both immediate deaths from combat and eventual deaths from enslavement or execution. The ship maintenance that keeps Viking vessels seaworthy requires constant attention and specialised skills, while the maintenance failures that result from inadequate care or lack of materials can cause structural problems that lead to vessel loss during routine operations. The maintenance knowledge that enables long-term vessel operation includes understanding of wood preservation, sail repair, and rigging maintenance, while the maintenance materials required for proper ship care may not be available during extended voyages or in remote locations. The communication systems that enable coordination between Viking ships include only visual signals and voice communication, while the coordination challenges that affect fleet operations create risks of separation and loss when ships become scattered during storms or other emergency situations. The communication limitations that affect Viking seafaring prevent effective rescue operations, while ensuring that ships in distress cannot summon assistance from other vessels that might be within helping distance. Your survival through a Viking Age winter would require preparation, skills, and resources that exceed the capabilities of modern people, while the 8-month winter season creates environmental conditions that kill through cold exposure, starvation, disease, and social breakdown that eliminates individuals and communities that lack adequate preparation for extended survival in Arctic conditions. The winter environment that dominates Viking life for most of each year creates survival challenges that demand constant attention, while the margin for error remains so small that single mistakes in preparation or resource management can prove fatal for entire communities. The fuel requirements for winter heating exceed the gathering and storage capabilities of modern people, while the wood collection that enables survival requires specialised tools, techniques, and knowledge of forest management that take years to develop. The heating demands that characterise Viking winter include maintaining fires for cooking, warmth, and essential crafts, while the fuel consumption rates during cold periods can exhaust wood supplies and force choices between heating and cooking that determine survival outcomes. The food storage systems that enable winter survival require preservation techniques and storage methods that modern people don't understand, while the food quality that results from Viking preservation methods creates nutritional challenges that affect health and immune system function throughout winter months. The preserved foods that sustain Viking communities during winter include items that modern palates would find inedible, while the nutritional deficiencies that result from preserved food diets create health problems that worsen over extended winter periods. The shelter insulation that protects against winter cold requires construction techniques and materials that exceed modern building knowledge, while the heating efficiency of Viking buildings depends on design features and maintenance practices that require specialised understanding of cold climate architecture. The building methods that enable winter survival include insulation systems and heating technologies that modern people lack, while the construction failures that result from inadequate knowledge create exposure conditions that prove fatal during extreme weather periods. The clothing systems that provide protection against winter cold require specialised materials and construction techniques, while the layering strategies that enable outdoor activity during winter conditions demand understanding of thermal regulation and moisture management that modern people lack. The winter clothing that Vikings use includes items made from materials and using techniques that require extensive preparation, while the clothing failures that result from inadequate construction or maintenance can cause frostbite and hypothermia during routine outdoor activities. The water procurement that becomes necessary when normal sources freeze requires ice-cutting tools and techniques, while the energy expenditure required for obtaining water during winter competes with other essential activities that determine survival outcomes. The water storage that prevents freezing during winter requires insulation methods and heating strategies, while the water quality that results from winter procurement may include contamination that creates health problems during periods when medical care remains unavailable. The social cooperation that enables community survival during winter requires organisation and leadership systems, while the resource sharing that becomes necessary during crisis periods may create conflicts that destroy the community cooperation essential for group survival. The social tensions that develop during extended winter isolation include disputes over resource allocation and decision-making authority, while the community breakdown that results from social conflicts can eliminate entire settlements during particularly harsh winter periods. The psychological challenges that affect winter survival include depression and anxiety that result from extended darkness and social isolation, while the mental health problems that develop during winter months interfere with survival decision-making and community cooperation. The psychological stress that characterises winter survival creates behavioural problems that may include violence and antisocial actions, while the mental health deterioration that occurs during extended winter isolation can cause permanent psychological damage. The emergency responses that become necessary during winter crises require preparation and resources that exceed individual capabilities, while the community emergency systems that address winter disasters depend on cooperation and organisation that may break down during crisis periods. The emergency preparedness that enables winter survival includes stockpiling resources and developing response plans, while the emergency failures that result from inadequate preparation can cause community-wide mortality during disaster situations. The hygiene maintenance that becomes difficult during winter conditions creates health problems that worsen over extended periods, while the sanitation challenges that affect winter communities include waste disposal and personal cleanliness issues that create disease transmission risks. The hygiene problems that develop during winter months include bacterial and parasitic infections that spread through communities, while the limited water access and indoor crowding create ideal conditions for disease transmission. The craft work that continues during winter months includes essential activities for maintaining tools, clothing, and equipment, while the indoor work that occupies winter time requires skills and materials that modern people lack. The winter crafts that enable survival include repair and maintenance activities that prevent equipment failure, while the craft knowledge that supports these activities requires training and experience that take years to develop. The planning systems that enable successful winter survival require understanding of resource requirements and consumption rates, while the preparation activities that occur during brief summer months must accomplish all essential tasks for winter survival within limited time periods. The planning failures that result from inadequate preparation or poor resource calculation can cause winter survival crises, while the preparation mistakes that occur during summer months create winter hardships that may prove fatal when resources become exhausted before spring returns. Your participation in Viking raids and warfare would expose you to combat conditions and military tactics that create mortality rates approaching those of modern, high-intensity warfare, while the primitive medical care and lack of protective equipment ensure that combat injuries prove fatal far more often than modern battlefield casualties. The raiding economy that supports Viking communities requires systematic participation in violent activities, while the warfare techniques that Vikings employ create casualty rates that eliminate significant portions of male populations during their prime fighting years. The weapons training that prepares Vikings for combat requires years of practice and physical conditioning, while the combat skills that determine survival during battles demand reflexes and muscle memory that can only be developed through extensive training and real combat experience. The weapon proficiency that enables effective fighting includes mastery of multiple weapon types, while the combat psychology that enables killing in life or death situations requires mental conditioning that modern people lack. The armour systems that provide protection during combat include equipment that offers limited protection against the weapons and tactics used in Viking warfare, while the weight and mobility restrictions of protective gear create trade-offs between protection and combat effectiveness. The armor availability that affects different social classes ensures that wealthy warriors receive better protection, while common fighters face combat with minimal defensive equipment that leaves them vulnerable to fatal injuries from sword strikes, arrow wounds, and spear thrusts. The battle formations that Vikings employ during organised warfare require training and coordination, while the tactical knowledge that enables effective group combat demands understanding of strategy and battlefield psychology that modern people lack. The formation fighting that characterises Viking battles includes shield walls and coordinated attacks that require discipline and training, while the formation failures that result from poor coordination can cause catastrophic casualties that eliminate entire units during single engagements. The siege warfare that Vikings encounter during raids on fortified positions creates prolonged combat conditions that exceed the endurance of modern people, while the siege techniques that Vikings employ include methods that expose attackers to defensive fire for extended periods. The siege mortality that affects Viking forces includes casualties from defensive weapons and disease outbreaks that develop during extended military campaigns, while the siege conditions create survival challenges that affect both attackers and defenders. The naval combat that occurs during Viking raids includes ship-to-ship fighting that combines seamanship with warfare skills, while the maritime battle conditions create unique hazards, including drowning risks and combat on unstable platforms. The naval warfare that Vikings practice requires specialised tactics and equipment, while the naval casualties that result from sea battles include both immediate combat deaths and drowning fatalities when damaged ships sink during or after engagements. The logistic systems that support Viking military operations include supply chains that must provide food, weapons and equipment during extended campaigns, while the logistical failures that affect military operations can cause army collapse and massive casualties when supply systems break down during critical periods. The military supply that enables Viking campaigns requires careful planning and resource management, while the supply disruptions that occur during warfare can force strategic withdrawals or create starvation conditions that weaken military effectiveness. The casualty rates that characterise Viking warfare include mortality levels that eliminate significant portions of fighting forces during major battles, while the wound mortality that results from primitive medical care ensures that many combat injuries prove fatal despite initial survival. The battle casualties that affect Viking armies include immediate deaths from weapon wounds and delayed deaths from infection and blood loss, while the medical treatment available during campaigns provides minimal care for serious injuries. The psychological warfare that Vikings employ during raids includes tactics designed to terrorise enemy populations, while the psychological effects of combat create mental health problems among Viking warriors that affect their long-term survival and social functioning. The combat psychology that affects Viking fighters includes trauma responses that may disable warriors, while the mental health consequences of prolonged violence create behavioural problems that affect warrior communities. The prisoner treatment that occurs during Viking raids includes enslavement and execution, while the captive populations that Vikings acquire during warfare face transportation under conditions that kill significant percentages during forced marches to slave markets. The slavery that results from Viking raids creates markets for human trafficking, while the slave conditions that Vikings impose create mortality rates that treat human beings as expendable commodities. The seasonal warfare that characterises Viking military activity includes campaign periods that correspond to weather conditions, while the warfare timing that affects Viking operations requires coordination with agricultural cycles and seasonal resource availability. The campaign seasons that enable Viking warfare include periods when weather permits travel, while the seasonal limitations that affect military operations create windows of vulnerability when communities must defend against attacks while managing other survival challenges. The military leadership that commands Viking forces includes aristocratic warriors whose tactical knowledge determines battle outcomes, while the command failures that result from poor leadership can cause military disasters that eliminate entire armies during single campaigns. The leadership systems that govern Viking warfare include hierarchies based on combat experience and social status, while the leadership challenges that affect military operations include maintaining discipline and morale during extended campaigns. The weapons technology that Vikings employ includes equipment that remains primitive compared to later military developments, while the weapon effectiveness that characterises Viking arms requires close combat fighting that exposes warriors to high casualty rates. The weapons development that occurs during the Viking Age includes improvements in metallurgy and design, while the weapons availability that affects different warriors creates disparities in combat effectiveness that influence survival outcomes. The fortification systems that Vikings encounter during raids include defensive works that require specialised siege techniques, while the fortification effectiveness that protects enemy populations creates tactical challenges that may cause high casualty rates among attacking forces. The defensive systems that Vikings must overcome include both natural barriers and constructed fortifications, while the siege methods that Vikings employ create prolonged exposures to defensive fire that increase casualty rates among attackers. Your psychological survival in Viking Age society would depend on your ability to navigate religious and supernatural belief systems that permeate every aspect of daily life, while the mental health challenges that affect Viking populations receive no effective treatment through medical or psychological interventions that might address trauma, depression, and other conditions that result from constant exposure to violence, environmental stress, and social instability. The religious obligations that govern Viking behaviour include ritual requirements and spiritual practices that demand time, resources, and activities that may conflict with survival priorities, while the supernatural beliefs that motivate Viking decision-making can lead to actions that increase rather than decrease survival risks during critical situations. The spiritual systems that guide Viking choices include concepts about fate and divine will that may prevent appropriate responses to environmental hazards and survival challenges. The mental health problems that affect Viking populations include trauma responses from combat exposure, domestic violence, and witnessing brutal executions, while the psychological support systems that might address these conditions remain unavailable in societies that view mental illness as supernatural affliction rather than medical condition requiring treatment. The psychological trauma that accumulates over Viking lifetimes creates behavioural problems and social dysfunction, while the trauma responses that affect individuals may include violence and antisocial behaviour that creates additional community problems. The supernatural explanations that Vikings use to understand disease and misfortune include attributions to divine punishment and supernatural interference, while these belief systems prevent development of practical solutions to health problems and survival challenges that could be addressed through rational analysis and evidence-based approaches. The supernatural thinking that characterises Viking worldviews can prevent appropriate responses to medical emergencies and environmental hazards while creating delays in treatment that worsen survival outcomes. The ritual obligations that Vikings must fulfill include ceremonies and offerings that require significant resources, while the ritual failures that result from inadequate performance or resource shortages are believed to cause divine punishment that affects entire communities. The religious requirements that govern Viking society include practices that consume time and materials needed for survival activities, while the ritual demands may create resource conflicts during critical survival periods. The shamanic practices that provide spiritual guidance in Viking communities include techniques for communicating with supernatural entities, while the shamanic knowledge that guides community decisions may conflict with practical survival strategies that would improve community outcomes. The spiritual leadership that shamans provide includes guidance that may encourage risky behaviours, while the shamanic traditions that govern spiritual practice can prevent adoption of more effective survival strategies. The divination systems that Vikings use for decision-making include methods for predicting future events, while the predictive accuracy of these systems provides no better than random chance for anticipating actual outcomes. The fortune-telling that influences Viking choices includes practices that may encourage poor decisions, while the divination results that guide strategic planning can lead to resource allocation and timing decisions that worsen survival prospects. The afterlife beliefs that motivate Viking behaviour include concepts about posthumous rewards that encourage dangerous activities, while the death mythology that governs Viking attitudes toward mortality may prevent appropriate caution during high-risk situations. The afterlife expectations that influence Viking choices include beliefs that encourage seeking death in combat, while these spiritual motivations can lead to unnecessary risks that reduce survival prospects for individuals and communities. The curse beliefs that affect Viking communities include concepts about supernatural punishment that create psychological stress and social conflict, while the fear of supernatural retaliation may prevent communities from making practical decisions that could improve survival outcomes. The magical thinking that characterizes Viking approaches to problem solving can interfere with rational analysis, while creating superstitious behaviors that waste resources and time during survival challenges. The seasonal depression that affects Viking populations during extended winter darkness creates psychological problems that worsen over time, while the mental health deterioration that occurs during isolation periods may include suicidal behavior and violence that destroys individuals and communities. The psychological effects of winter isolation include depression and anxiety, while the mental health problems that develop during extended darkness can create permanent psychological damage that affects long-term survival capabilities. The social isolation that affects individuals who violate community norms includes ostracism and abandonment, while the psychological effects of social rejection create mental health problems that may worsen over time without community support. The social exclusion that results from violating religious or cultural expectations can eliminate access to resources and protection, while creating psychological stress that affects individual survival capabilities. The hallucinogenic practices that Vikings may use for spiritual purposes include consumption of substances that create altered mental states, while the psychological effects of drug use can create permanent mental health problems that affect judgment and survival decision-making. The substance use that occurs during religious ceremonies may include drugs that cause psychological damage, while the altered consciousness that results from these practices can interfere with survival planning and emergency responses. The grief and loss that result from high mortality rates in Viking communities creates psychological trauma, while the absence of effective grief counselling and support systems ensures that psychological damage accumulates over time. The bereavement that affects Viking families includes losses from violence, disease, and environmental hazards, while the grief responses that develop may include depression and antisocial behaviour that affects community functioning. The violence exposure that characterises Viking life creates psychological conditioning that may include desensitisation to brutality, while the mental health effects of constant violence exposure include trauma responses that affect social relationships and decision-making capabilities. The psychological damage that results from witnessing and participating in violence may include permanent changes in personality and behaviour, while the violence normalisation that occurs in Viking society can prevent recognition of psychological problems that require intervention. The stress responses that develop during survival challenges include physiological and psychological changes that affect immune system function, while the chronic stress that characterises Viking life creates health problems that worsen over time without effective stress management techniques. The stress-related illness that affects Viking populations includes both physical and mental health problems, while the stress accumulation that occurs during extended survival challenges can cause psychological breakdown that affects survival capabilities. Your children's survival in Viking Age society would depend on their ability to contribute to family survival from early ages, while the childhood mortality rates that affect Viking populations eliminate significant percentages of children before they reach adulthood through disease, accidents, malnutrition and violence that target the most vulnerable members of society. The child-rearing practices that characterize Viking families prioritize survival preparation over child development, while exposing children to adult responsibilities and dangers that would be considered child abuse by modern standards. The infant mortality that affects Viking families includes death rates that exceed 50% during the first year of life, while the causes of infant death include malnutrition, disease, exposure, and violence that could be prevented with modern medical care and child protection systems. The infant survival that enables childhood requires constant attention and resources, while the infant care that mothers can provide remains limited by their own survival obligations and the resource constraints that affect Viking families. The child labour that begins in early childhood includes work assignments that expose children to dangerous conditions, while the economic contributions that children must provide for family survival include activities that modern child protection laws would prohibit. The child work that supports Viking families includes dangerous tasks that may cause injury or death, while the work, obligations that affect children prevent normal childhood development and education that might improve their long-term survival prospects. The educational systems that prepare Viking children for adult survival include practical training in combat, crafts, and survival skills, while the educational content that children receive emphasises practical knowledge over intellectual development. The learning opportunities that children receive focus on immediately useful skills, while the educational limitations that affect Viking youth prevent development of abstract thinking and problem-solving capabilities that might enable innovation and adaptation. The physical abuse that children experience as normal discipline includes violence that would be classified as criminal assault in modern legal systems, while the child punishment that Viking parents employ includes methods that cause physical and psychological damage. The disciplinary violence that affects Viking children includes beatings and other punishments that may cause permanent injury, while the abuse normalization that characterizes child-rearing practices creates psychological damage that affects adult behavior and survival capabilities. The nutritional deprivation that affects Viking children includes inadequate food allocation during scarcity periods, while the malnutrition that results from poor diet creates developmental problems that affect physical and mental capabilities throughout life. The child nutrition that Viking families can provide depends on family resources, while the nutrition priorities that govern food allocation may favour adults whose immediate survival capabilities are considered more important than child development needs. The exposure to violence that characterises childhood in Viking society includes witnessing combat, executions, and domestic violence, while the psychological effects of violence exposure create trauma responses that affect child development and mental health. The violence normalization that occurs during childhood includes conditioning that prepares children for adult participation in violent activities, while creating psychological adaptation that may prevent normal emotional development. The child marriage arrangements that affect Viking youth include partnerships that prioritise family alliances over child welfare, while the marriage timing that governs Viking relationships may include arrangements for children who have not reached physical or emotional maturity for adult relationships. The child marriages that occur in Viking society create additional survival burdens for young people, while the marriage obligations that children must fulfill may prevent normal development and education. The child abandonment that occurs during resource crises includes practices that prioritise family survival over child welfare, while the abandonment decisions that families must make during survival emergencies may involve choosing which children to support when resources become inadequate for entire families. The child sacrifice that occurs during extreme survival situations includes abandonment and infanticide, while the family survival strategies that involve child abandonment create psychological trauma for surviving family members. The disease exposure that affects Viking children includes higher vulnerability to infectious diseases, while the medical care that children receive remains minimal and often ineffective for serious health problems. The child health that results from primitive medical knowledge includes high mortality rates from preventable diseases, while the healthcare that children receive may be rationed based on their economic value to families rather than medical need. The accidental injuries that affect Viking children include workplace accidents and environmental hazards, while the accident rates that result from dangerous living conditions create casualty levels that would be considered catastrophic in modern societies. The accident prevention that might protect children remains minimal, while the dangerous environments that characterise Viking settlements expose children to risks that cause frequent injuries and deaths. The social protection that might defend children from abuse and exploitation remains non-existent, while the child welfare systems that could address neglect and mistreatment don't exist in Viking society. The child protection that modern legal systems provide includes intervention mechanisms that prevent abuse, while the absence of child welfare systems in Viking society ensures that children remain vulnerable to exploitation and violence without recourse or protection. The psychological development that occurs during Viking childhood includes exposure to trauma and stress that affect mental health, while the psychological support that children need for healthy development remains unavailable in societies that don't understand child psychology or development needs. The mental health problems that develop during childhood include trauma responses that affect adult behaviour, while the psychological damage that occurs during development may create permanent mental health problems. The survival training that children receive includes preparation for adult challenges, while the training methods that prepare children for survival may include exposure to dangers that cause injury or death during the learning process. The survival education that children receive emphasises practical skills, while the educational risks that accompany survival training may include accidents that eliminate children during the preparation process that should enable their long-term survival. The family dynamics that affect child welfare include relationships that prioritise survival over child development, while the family structures that govern Viking households may create environments where children face neglect and abuse. The family survival strategies that affect children include decisions that may sacrifice child welfare for adult survival, while the family priorities that govern resource allocation may systematically disadvantage children whose immediate economic contributions are considered less important than adult capabilities. The cultural practices that affect children include rituals and traditions that may cause harm, while the cultural expectations that govern childhood include requirements that children participate in dangerous activities as normal aspects of cultural participation. The cultural conditioning that children receive includes preparation for adult roles that may involve violence and risk, while the cultural values that guide child rearing may prioritise community needs over individual child welfare. Your survival as a woman in Viking society would require navigating gender-specific dangers and disadvantages while facing all the environmental and social challenges that affect men, creating conditions where female survival depends on managing both universal Viking age hazards and additional risks that result from gender-based discrimination and exploitation. The women's roles that Viking society recognises include responsibilities that expose females to unique dangers while providing limited protections and resources compared to those available to men with similar social status. The reproductive burdens that affect Viking women include pregnancy and childbirth under primitive medical conditions, while the maternal mortality rates that result from obstetric complications eliminate significant percentages of women during their reproductive years. The pregnancy survival that Viking women achieve depends on factors beyond their control, while the childbirth process includes risks that prove fatal for both mothers and infants despite the reproductive success that determines family and community survival. The domestic violence that affects Viking women includes systematic abuse within marriage relationships, while the legal and social systems that govern family life provide minimal protection for women who experience violence from husbands and male family members. The domestic abuse that characterises many Viking marriages includes physical violence that may cause serious injury or death, while the social acceptance of male dominance ensures that domestic violence receives little intervention or punishment. The sexual exploitation that threatens Viking women includes rape and sexual assault, while the legal systems that address sexual violence provide minimal protection and often blame victims rather than punishing perpetrators. The sexual violence that women experience includes both stranger assault and domestic rape, while the social attitudes that govern sexual relationships treat female consent as irrelevant to male sexual rights within marriage and social relationships. The economic discrimination that affects Viking women includes limited access to property ownership and economic opportunities, while the gender-based restrictions that govern female participation in commerce and craft production create economic dependency on male family members. The economic vulnerability that results from gender discrimination ensures that women remain dependent on men for survival, while the economic opportunities that might enable female independence remain limited or unavailable. The work assignments that women receive include physically demanding labour, while the gender-based division of labour assigns women responsibilities that may be as dangerous and difficult as male work assignments, but receive less social recognition and economic compensation. The The female labour that supports Viking communities includes essential work that enables community survival, while the work recognition that women receive remains minimal compared to male contributions that receive greater social and economic rewards. The social restrictions that limit female participation in community decision-making include exclusion from political processes, while the governance systems that control Viking communities treat female opinions as less valuable than male perspectives on community issues. The political exclusion that affects women ensures that community decisions that affect female welfare are made without female input, while the decision-making processes that govern community survival may ignore female needs and perspectives. The marriage arrangements that control female partnership choices include family decisions that prioritise economic and political considerations over female preferences, while the marriage systems that govern Viking relationships treat women as property that can be transferred between families through alliance arrangements. The marriage control that affects women eliminates personal autonomy over partnership decisions, while creating relationships that may increase rather than reduce female vulnerability to abuse and exploitation. The inheritance rights that affect Viking women include limited access to family property, while the inheritance systems that govern wealth transfer may exclude women from receiving property that could enable economic independence. The property restrictions that affect women ensure continuing economic dependence, while the inheritance patterns that favour male family members create additional economic vulnerability for women whose survival depends on male family support. The legal status that governs female participation in Viking justice systems includes restrictions on testimony and legal representation, while the legal protections that women receive remain minimal compared to those available to men with similar social status. The legal discrimination that affects women ensures that crimes against females receive less punishment, while the legal remedies available to female victims provide inadequate compensation and protection. The religious roles that women can fulfill include limited participation in spiritual leadership, while the religious systems that govern Viking spirituality may restrict female access to certain ceremonies and spiritual practices. The spiritual restrictions that affect women include exclusion from some religious activities, while the religious leadership that women can provide remains limited compared to male spiritual authority within Viking religious systems. The mobility restrictions that limit female travel include social expectations that confine women to domestic spheres, while the travel limitations that affect women may prevent access to resources and opportunities that could improve survival prospects. The movement control that affects women includes restrictions on independent travel, while the mobility limitations may increase female vulnerability during emergencies that require rapid relocation or escape from dangerous situations. The healthcare access that women receive includes gender-based discrimination in medical treatment, while the reproductive healthcare that women need often remains unavailable or inadequate for addressing female-specific health problems. The medical discrimination that affects women ensures that female health problems receive less attention, while the healthcare resources that women can access may be rationed based on their perceived economic value rather than medical need. The education opportunities that women receive include limited access to knowledge and skill development, while the educational restrictions that affect females prevent intellectual development that might enable greater independence and survival capabilities. The learning limitations that affect women include exclusion from certain types of knowledge, while the education that women receive may focus on domestic skills rather than broader survival capabilities that could improve female independence. The protection systems that might defend women from violence and exploitation remain inadequate, while the social support that women need during crises may be unavailable when male protection is absent or inadequate. The protection deficits that affect women include vulnerability to violence, while the support systems that might assist women during emergencies remain dependent on male family members who may be unavailable or unwilling to provide assistance. The aging process that affects Viking women includes additional vulnerabilities during periods when physical capabilities decline, while the social support that elderly women receive may be reduced when their economic contributions become minimal. The elderly women whose survival depends on family support may face abandonment when resources become scarce, while the aging process creates additional survival challenges for women whose protection depends on male family members. The widowhood experiences that affect women whose husbands die include economic vulnerability and social isolation, while the survival prospects for women without male protection become significantly reduced. The widow survival that Viking society enables depends on family support systems, while the widowhood challenges that women face may include property loss and economic hardship that threaten survival during crisis periods. The community relationships that women can maintain include social networks that provide mutual support, while the female cooperation that develops among women may create survival advantages through resource sharing and mutual assistance. The women's networks that emerge in Viking communities include relationships that provide emotional and practical support, while the female solidarity that develops may help women survive challenges that would be impossible to face individually. Your death in the Viking Age would occur with the same brutal efficiency that characterizes all aspects of Viking existence, while the disposal of your body would reflect social status and family resources rather than any universal recognition of human dignity or value. The mortality patterns that affect Viking populations include death rates that would be considered catastrophic by modern standards, while the life expectancy that Vikings can expect remains dramatically lower than modern populations due to environmental hazards, violence, disease, and inadequate medical care that make survival past 30 a remarkable achievement rather than an expected outcome. The statistical reality of Viking mortality creates demographic patterns where communities must constantly replace dead members, while the population turnover that results from high death rates ensures that most Viking settlements consist primarily of young people who have not yet succumbed to the numerous threats that eliminate older individuals. The life expectancy calculations that apply to Viking populations suggest average lifespans of 20 to 30 years, while the mortality curves that characterize Viking demographics show steep death rates during infancy, childhood, and early adulthood that reflect the cumulative impact of environmental hazards and social violence. The death timing that affects Viking individuals creates patterns where people die during their most productive years, while the loss of adults during prime working ages creates labour shortages that affect community survival capabilities. The age-specific mortality that characterises Viking populations includes particularly high death rates among individuals aged 15 to 35, who should represent the core workforce and reproductive population, creating demographic imbalances that threaten community continuity and survival. The gender-specific mortality patterns that affect Viking populations show different death rates for men and women, while the causes of gender-related mortality reflect the distinct dangers that affect male and female populations. The male mortality that results from warfare and dangerous occupations creates survival advantages for women in some age groups, while the female mortality from childbirth and domestic violence creates different survival patterns that affect family structures and community demographics. The causes of death that eliminate Viking individuals include combinations of factors that create mortality patterns reflecting the harsh realities of Northern European survival, while the death timing that affects Viking populations ensures that most people die before reaching ages that modern people consider normal lifespans. The mortality causes that characterize Viking deaths include violence, disease, environmental exposure, and accidents, while the death patterns that emerge from Viking life create population dynamics where youth and prime adults face higher mortality rates than modern societies experience. The multifactorial nature of Viking mortality means that most deaths result from combinations of malnutrition, disease, injury, and environmental stress that weaken individuals until minor additional stresses prove fatal. The death causation that affects Vikings often involves cascading failures where initial health problems create vulnerabilities that make individuals susceptible to additional threats that might be survivable for healthy people. The cumulative damage that accumulates throughout Viking lifetimes ensures that death often results from the interaction of multiple health problems rather than single catastrophic events. The malnutrition component that contributes to Viking mortality includes chronic undernourishment that weakens immune systems while making individuals vulnerable to diseases that well-nourished people could survive. The nutritional deficiencies that affect Viking populations create baseline health problems that make people susceptible to infection, while the periodic famines that characterize Viking existence create starvation conditions that kill directly while weakening survivors for future health challenges. The disease vulnerability that results from malnutrition creates conditions where minor infections prove fatal, while the immune system depression that accompanies poor nutrition makes Viking populations susceptible to epidemic diseases that spread rapidly through weakened communities. The infection mortality that affects malnourished Vikings includes deaths from diseases that modern people survive easily, while the disease transmission that occurs in overcrowded settlements with poor sanitation creates epidemic conditions that eliminate entire communities during single outbreaks. The violent deaths that account for significant portions of Viking mortality include combat casualties, murder, and execution, while the violence-related mortality that affects Viking populations reflects the warrior culture and conflict-based society that characterizes Viking civilization. The violent death that Vikings face includes both battlefield casualties and domestic violence, while the murder rates that affect Viking communities exceed those of modern societies by enormous margins that reflect the normalization of violence as conflict resolution. The combat mortality that affects Viking warriors includes death rates that approach those of modern high-intensity warfare, while the primitive medical care that battlefield casualties receive ensures that wounds that might be survivable with modern treatment prove fatal for Viking fighters. The battlefield deaths that occur during Viking conflicts include both immediate fatalities from weapon wounds and delayed deaths from infection and blood loss, while the combat medicine that Vikings practice provides minimal intervention for serious injuries. The raid mortality that affects Viking expeditions includes casualties from both successful and failed raids, while the raiding activities that characterize Viking economy create regular opportunities for violent death that affect significant portions of male populations. The raiding deaths that occur during Viking expeditions include combat casualties and deaths from shipwreck, while the raiding risks that Viking men face create mortality patterns that eliminate large percentages of the male population during their prime fighting years. The execution mortality that affects Viking populations includes deaths from formal legal punishment and informal justice, while the execution practices that Viking communities employ include methods that reflect social status and crime severity. The execution deaths that occur in Viking society include both individual punishments and mass executions that eliminate entire families or groups, while the execution methods that Vikings use include techniques designed to maximize suffering and serve as public warnings about the consequences of social violations. The domestic violence mortality that affects Viking households includes deaths from family conflicts and spousal abuse, while the domestic violence that characterizes Viking family life creates mortality patterns that particularly affect women and children. The family violence that occurs in Viking homes includes lethal assaults that reflect the normalization of violence, while the domestic murder rates that affect Viking families exceed modern domestic violence statistics by enormous margins that demonstrate the absence of legal protection for vulnerable family members. The disease mortality that eliminates large percentages of Viking populations includes infectious diseases that spread rapidly through communities, while the epidemic deaths that periodically devastate Viking settlements can eliminate entire communities during single disease outbreaks. The disease patterns that affect Viking mortality include both endemic conditions that kill steadily and epidemic diseases that cause mass mortality, while the medical limitations that prevent disease treatment ensure that minor illnesses often prove fatal. The epidemic diseases that periodically devastate Viking communities include smallpox, plague, and other infectious diseases that kill significant portions of populations, while the epidemic mortality that affects Viking settlements can eliminate 50% or more of community members during single outbreaks. The epidemic transmission that occurs in Viking communities includes rapid disease spread through overcrowded settlements, while the epidemic duration that affects Viking communities can extend for months or years when diseases become endemic in local populations. The endemic diseases that kill steadily throughout Viking populations include tuberculosis, dysentery, and other chronic conditions that eliminate individuals gradually while creating baseline mortality that affect all age groups. The endemic mortality that results from constant disease presence includes deaths that occur regularly, while the endemic disease burden that affects Viking communities creates health problems that weaken populations and make them vulnerable to epidemic outbreaks. The waterborne diseases that affect Viking populations include cholera and typhoid that spread through contaminated water supplies, while the waterborne mortality that results from poor sanitation creates disease transmission that affects entire communities when water sources become contaminated. The water contamination that characterises Viking settlements includes sewage pollution and animal waste that creates disease transmission, while the water treatment that Vikings practice provides no protection against bacterial contamination. The respiratory diseases that spread through Viking communities include pneumonia and tuberculosis that prove fatal for weakened individuals, while the respiratory mortality that affects Viking populations includes deaths from lung infections that could be treated with modern antibiotics. The respiratory transmission that occurs in overcrowded Viking dwellings includes disease spread through shared air, while the respiratory disease burden that affects Viking communities creates chronic health problems that worsen over time. The environmental deaths that result from exposure, starvation, and weather-related disasters include mortality from conditions that modern populations rarely face, while the environmental mortality that affects Vikings reflects the harsh climate and primitive survival technology that characterises Viking Age life. The exposure deaths that occur during Viking winters include hypothermia and frostbite, while the starvation mortality that affects Viking communities during food shortages can eliminate significant portions of populations during extended crisis periods. The hypothermia deaths that occur during Viking winters include mortality from cold exposure that proves fatal within hours, while the hypothermia risk that affects Viking populations includes vulnerability to cold that results from inadequate clothing and heating. The cold mortality that characterises Viking winters includes deaths from freezing, while the winter survival that Vikings achieve requires constant attention to heat conservation and fuel management that may fail during extreme weather conditions. The starvation deaths that occur during food shortages include mortality from complete nutritional failure, while the starvation process that affects Viking individuals includes gradual wasting that may extend over weeks or months before proving fatal. The famine mortality that affects Viking communities includes deaths that occur when food supplies become exhausted, while the starvation patterns that characterise Viking existence include seasonal food shortages that create predictable mortality periods. The dehydration deaths that occur during droughts and water shortages include mortality from fluid loss, while the dehydration risks that affect Viking populations include vulnerability to water scarcity that may prove fatal when water sources become contaminated or unavailable. The water shortage mortality that affects Viking communities includes deaths from thirst, while the water procurement that Vikings require for survival may become impossible during drought conditions or when water sources freeze completely. The weather disaster mortality that affects Viking populations includes deaths from storms, floods, and other extreme weather events, while the disaster deaths that occur during severe weather include both immediate casualties and delayed mortality from exposure and starvation that follow weather disasters. The storm mortality that affects Viking communities includes deaths from building collapse and flooding, while the weather casualties that result from extreme conditions include both direct deaths and indirect mortality from the disruption of survival systems. The accidental deaths that result from dangerous work and primitive safety standards include mortality from activities that modern safety regulations would prevent, while the accident rates that characterise Viking life reflect the hazardous nature of survival activities and the absence of safety technology that modern populations depend on. The workplace accidents that kill Vikings include injuries from tools, construction work, and maritime activities, while the accident mortality reflects the dangerous nature of essential survival tasks. The tool-related accidents that cause Viking deaths include injuries from sharp implements and heavy tools, while the tool safety that Vikings practice provides minimal protection against accidents that result from equipment failure or user error. The tool mortality that affects Viking workers includes deaths from cuts, crushing injuries, and tool malfunctions, while the tool-related injuries that occur during essential work often prove fatal when medical treatment remains unavailable or inadequate. The construction accidents that affect Viking building projects include deaths from falls, crushing injuries, and structural collapse, while the construction safety that Viking builders practice provides no protection against accidents that result from primitive construction techniques and inadequate safety equipment. The construction mortality that affects Viking workers includes deaths from workplace hazards, while the building-related casualties that occur during construction projects reflect the dangerous nature of medieval building techniques. The maritime accidents that cause Viking deaths include drowning, shipwreck, and accidents during fishing and transportation, while the maritime mortality that affects Viking sailors includes death rates that exceed modern commercial fishing statistics. The sea-related deaths that occur during Viking voyages include both immediate drowning and delayed mortality from exposure, while the maritime safety that Viking sailors practice provides minimal protection against ocean hazards. The fire accidents that cause Viking deaths include burns and smoke inhalation, while the fire safety that Viking communities practice provides limited protection against accidental fires that can spread rapidly through wooden structures. The fire mortality that affects Viking settlements includes deaths from house fires and workshop accidents, while the fire-related casualties that occur in Viking communities reflect the dangerous nature of open flame heating and lighting systems. The death recognition that occurs in Viking communities includes social responses that vary by individual status, while the death acknowledgement that families and communities provide reflects social hierarchies that determine the level of attention and resources devoted to individual deaths. The death recognition that Vikings receive depends on their social status and community contributions, while the death acknowledgement may range from elaborate funeral ceremonies to simple disposal depending on family resources and social position. The social status impact on death recognition includes different treatment for aristocrats, free farmers, and slaves, while the status-based death responses that characterize Viking society treat human lives as inherently unequal in value and deserving of recognition. The aristocratic deaths that receive maximum attention include elaborate funeral ceremonies and lasting memorial, while the slave deaths that receive minimal recognition may involve simple disposal without ceremony or remembrance. The community contribution assessment that determines death recognition includes evaluation of individual achievements and social value, while the contribution-based responses that govern death acknowledgement reflect community judgment about individual worth and legacy. The high-value deaths that receive community recognition include those of individuals whose skills and leadership contributed significantly to community survival, while the low-value deaths that receive minimal attention include those of individuals whose contributions were considered replaceable or minimal. The family resource impact on death recognition includes the ability to provide funeral ceremonies and memorial activities, while the economic capacity that families possess determines the scale and elaborateness of death recognition activities. The wealthy family deaths that receive elaborate recognition include ceremonies that demonstrate family status, while the poor family deaths that receive minimal recognition reflect economic limitations that prevent appropriate memorial activities. The timing impact on death recognition includes seasonal factors and community circumstances that affect the attention and resources available for death acknowledgement, while the timing-related variations in death recognition reflect practical limitations on funeral activities during crisis periods. The convenient timing deaths that receive full recognition occur when communities have adequate resources and time for appropriate ceremonies, while the inconvenient timing deaths that receive reduced recognition occur during periods when survival pressures prevent normal funeral activities. The body preparation that occurs after death includes procedures that reflect religious beliefs and social customs, while the preparation methods that Vikings use depend on available resources and seasonal conditions that affect preservation and disposal options. The body treatment that dead Vikings receive includes washing and preparation rituals, while the preservation methods that families can employ depend on climate conditions and available materials that affect decomposition rates and disposal timing. The religious preparation that accompanies Viking death includes ritual washing and blessing, while the spiritual preparation that families provide reflects beliefs about afterlife requirements and soul protection. The religious body treatment that Vikings receive includes ceremonies that prepare the deceased for spiritual transition, while the ritual preparation may include specific procedures that ensure appropriate afterlife outcomes according to Viking religious beliefs. The physical preparation that preserves bodies for funeral activities includes techniques for slowing decomposition, while the preservation methods that Vikings employ include cooling, drying, and chemical treatments that maintain body condition during preparation periods. The preservation techniques that families use depend on available materials, while the preservation duration that families can achieve determines the time available for funeral preparation and ceremony organization. The seasonal preservation challenges that affect body preparation include temperature extremes and weather conditions that accelerate decomposition, while the seasonal techniques that Vikings employ include methods adapted to specific climate conditions. The winter preservation that benefits from cold temperatures includes storage methods that use natural refrigeration, while the summer preservation that faces accelerated decomposition requires rapid preparation and disposal to prevent body deterioration. The preservation failure that may occur during body preparation includes decomposition that makes normal funeral activities impossible, while the preservation problems that families encounter may force rapid disposal or modified funeral procedures. The decomposition issues that affect Viking death include body deterioration that creates health hazards, while the preservation limitations that families face may prevent appropriate funeral recognition for deceased family members. The funeral ceremonies that commemorate Viking deaths include rituals that reflect religious beliefs and social status, while the ceremony elaborateness that families can afford depends on economic resources and community support that determine the scale and complexity of funeral activities. The funeral practices that characterize Viking death include both religious and social elements, while the ceremony variations that occur reflect family wealth and community status of deceased individuals. The religious ceremonies that accompany Viking funerals include spiritual rituals that ensure appropriate afterlife outcomes, while the religious elements that characterize Viking funerals reflect beliefs about death and spiritual transition. The spiritual ceremonies that families organize include prayers and offerings, while the religious practices that govern Viking death include specific procedures that protect the deceased during afterlife transition. The social ceremonies that commemorate Viking lives include community recognition of individual achievements, while the social elements that characterize Viking funerals reflect community assessment of individual contributions and legacy. The community ceremonies that honor deceased Vikings include storytelling and memorial activities, while the social recognition that individuals receive through funeral ceremonies reflects their community status and achievements. The feast ceremonies that accompany significant Viking funerals include memorial meals that demonstrate family resources, while the feast elements that characterize elaborate funerals reflect social expectations about appropriate funeral hospitality. The funeral feasts that families organize include food and drink that may consume significant family resources, while the feast obligations that accompany funeral ceremonies reflect social pressure to demonstrate appropriate respect for deceased family members. The ceremony duration that characterizes Viking funerals includes events that may extend over multiple days, while the ceremony timing that families organize depends on preparation requirements and community availability for funeral participation. The extended ceremonies that accompany important deaths include multiple events that demonstrate family commitment, while the ceremony scheduling that families arrange must coordinate community participation with practical requirements for body disposal. The burial methods that Vikings employ include procedures that reflect environmental conditions and religious beliefs, while the burial practices that families choose depend on available resources and seasonal factors that affect ground conditions and disposal options. The burial techniques that Vikings use include both ground burial and alternative methods, while the burial locations that families select may reflect religious beliefs and practical considerations about land use and community planning. The ground burial that represents traditional Viking disposal includes excavation and interment, while the ground burial techniques that families employ depend on soil conditions and available labour for excavation work. The excavation work that ground burial requires includes digging graves that may be shallow or deep, depending on ground conditions, while the burial depth that families achieve may be limited by frozen ground or rocky soil that prevents adequate excavation. The burial container construction that accompanies ground burial includes coffins and burial chambers, while the container materials that families use depend on available resources and construction skills. The burial containers that Vikings construct include wooden coffins and stone chambers, while the container quality that families provide reflects economic resources and construction capabilities that determine burial elaborateness. The burial mound construction that may accompany significant burials includes earthwork that creates lasting memorial, while the mound construction that families undertake requires significant labour and resources that demonstrate family commitment to memorial preservation. The burial mounds that mark important graves include earthwork that may persist for centuries, while the mound size and construction quality reflect family resources and community recognition of deceased individuals. The burial location selection that determines grave placement includes consideration of religious beliefs and practical factors, while the location choices that families make reflect beliefs about appropriate burial sites and community land use planning. The burial sites that families select include both individual grave locations and community burial grounds, while the location decisions may reflect religious requirements and practical considerations about land availability and community organisation. The cremation practices that some Viking communities employ include procedures that reflect religious beliefs about afterlife and spiritual transition, while the cremation methods that families use depend on available fuel and community customs that govern fire-based disposal. The cremation ceremonies that accompany fire-based disposal include rituals that reflect spiritual beliefs, while the cremation practices may include elaborate fire construction and ceremony elements that demonstrate family resources and social status. The cremation fire construction that enables body disposal includes pyre building that requires significant fuel resources, while the fire construction techniques that families employ determine burning effectiveness and ceremony duration. The cremation pyres that families build include wooden structures that may consume entire trees, while the pyre construction quality affects burning completeness and ceremony success. The cremation fuel requirements that enable complete body disposal include wood quantities that may exceed family resources, while the fuel procurement that cremation requires may compete with heating and cooking needs during fuel-scarce periods. The cremation fuel that families must provide includes dry wood that burns effectively, while the fuel quantities required for complete cremation may represent significant family resources that affect survival capabilities. The cremation ceremony elements that accompany fire-based disposal include rituals that demonstrate religious beliefs, while the ceremony components that families organise may include offerings and memorial activities that extend beyond simple body disposal. The cremation ceremonies that families conduct include spiritual elements that reflect beliefs about fire purification, while the ceremony elaborateness may demonstrate family resources and social commitment to appropriate death recognition. The cremation remains disposal that follows fire-based body destruction includes ash collection and burial, while the remains treatment that families provide for cremation ashes may include burial or scattering, according to religious beliefs and family preferences. The cremation ashes that result from body burning may be collected for burial, while the ash disposal that families arrange reflects beliefs about appropriate treatment of cremation remains. The grave goods that accompany Viking burials include items that reflect beliefs about afterlife needs, while the burial wealth that families can provide depends on economic resources and social expectations about appropriate memorial displays. The grave items that Vikings receive include weapons, tools, and personal possessions, while the burial wealth may include valuable items that demonstrate family status and community recognition of individual achievements. The weapon grave goods that accompany warrior burials include swords, axes, and shields, while the weapon quality that families provide for burial reflects both economic resources and beliefs about afterlife combat requirements. The burial weapons that warriors receive include their personal fighting equipment, while the weapon value that families sacrifice for burial may represent significant economic loss that demonstrates family commitment to appropriate warrior funeral practices. The tool grave goods that accompany craftsman burials include implements related to individual occupations, while the tool selection that families choose for burial reflects beliefs about afterlife work requirements and individual professional identity. The burial tools that craftsmen receive include specialized implements, while the tool quality and quantity that families provide may reflect professional achievement and family economic capacity. The personal possession, grave goods that accompany individual burials include clothing, jewellery, and personal items, while the possession selection that families make for burial reflects beliefs about individual identity and afterlife needs. The personal items that individuals receive for burial include possessions that defined personal identity, while the possession value that families sacrifice for burial may represent significant economic cost that demonstrates family love and respect. The valuable grave goods that accompany high-status burials include precious metals, imported items, and luxury goods, while the valuable items that families provide for burial may represent enormous economic sacrifice that affects family survival capabilities. The burial wealth that high-status individuals receive includes items that demonstrate social achievement, while the valuable grave goods may include items worth more than family annual income that reflect social expectations about appropriate status recognition. The memorial practices that preserve memory of deceased Vikings include social customs that maintain awareness of individual contributions, while the memorial duration that communities provide depends on social status and family efforts to maintain remembrance activities. The memorial systems that Viking communities employ include storytelling and naming practices, while the memory preservation that occurs may include both formal and informal recognition of deceased individuals. The storytelling memorial that preserves individual memory includes narrative traditions that maintain awareness of personal achievements, while the storytelling practices that communities employ may include both factual accounts and legendary elaboration of individual accomplishments. The memorial stories that preserve individual memory include accounts of personal achievement, while the storytelling tradition that maintains these memories may persist for generations when individuals achieve sufficient recognition to warrant narrative preservation. The naming memorial that honours deceased individuals includes place names and personal names that preserve memory, while the naming practices that communities employ may include both geographic features and family naming traditions that maintain awareness of individual contributions. The memorial naming that preserves individual memory includes both formal recognition and informal remembrance, while the naming traditions that honour deceased individuals may persist long after specific achievements are forgotten. The physical memorial that creates lasting recognition includes monument construction and grave marking, while the physical remembrance that families create may include both temporary and permanent memorial structures that maintain visual recognition of individual graves and achievements. The memorial monuments that preserve individual memory include stone markers and burial structures, while the monument construction quality and durability reflect family resources and community commitment to lasting recognition. The anniversary memorial that maintains regular remembrance includes periodic ceremonies and activities that honour deceased individuals, while the anniversary practices that families maintain may include both private and community recognition that preserves memory through regular observance. The memorial anniversaries that honour deceased individuals include both death dates and achievement commemorations, while the anniversary observance that families maintain reflects ongoing commitment to memory preservation. The inheritance procedures that follow Viking deaths include property distribution systems that reflect legal customs and family relationships, while the inheritance patterns that govern wealth transfer may create conflicts that affect community stability and family relationships. The property distribution that occurs after death includes both formal and informal transfers, while the inheritance conflicts that emerge may include disputes that require community intervention or legal resolution. The legal inheritance that governs property distribution includes customary law and community practices, while the legal procedures that determine inheritance may include both established precedent and case-by-case community decisions that reflect specific circumstances. The inheritance law that governs Viking property distribution includes both written and unwritten rules, while the legal enforcement that ensures inheritance compliance may include community pressure and formal dispute resolution. The family inheritance that determines property distribution includes relationships that affect inheritance priority, while the family considerations that influence property transfer may include both blood relationships and adoption practices that create inheritance rights. The family inheritance patterns that govern Viking property distribution include both patrilineal and matrilineal elements, while the family disputes that arise over inheritance may require community intervention to resolve conflicts that threaten family stability. The property inheritance that includes land, tools, and valuable items, while the property evaluation that determines inheritance value may include both objective assessment and family negotiation that affects distribution outcomes. The inheritance property that families distribute includes both productive assets and personal possessions, while the property division that occurs after death may require careful evaluation to ensure fair distribution among multiple inheritors. The debt inheritance that may accompany property distribution includes obligations that surviving family members must fulfill, while the debt responsibility that accompanies inheritance may include both formal and informal obligations that affect family economic circumstances. The inheritance debts that families must address include both specific obligations and general responsibility for deceased family member commitments, while the debt resolution that follows death may require family resources that affect inheritance value. The social impact of individual deaths includes community effects that vary by social status and timing, while the death consequences that affect Viking communities may include leadership transitions and resource redistribution that influence community survival capabilities. The social disruption that results from important deaths may include succession conflicts, while the community adaptation that follows significant deaths may require reorganization of leadership and resource management systems. The leadership impact that follows important deaths includes succession decisions and authority transfer, while the leadership consequences that affect Viking communities may include both planned and unplanned transitions that influence community organization and decision-making. The leadership succession that follows death includes both formal and informal processes, while the authority transfer that occurs may include both smooth transitions and contested successions that create community conflict. The resource impact that follows individual deaths includes redistribution of property and responsibilities, while the resource consequences that affect communities may include both immediate and long-term effects on community capabilities and survival prospects. The resource redistribution that occurs after death includes both property transfer and responsibility reassignment, while the resource effects may include both positive and negative impacts on community survival capabilities. The skill impact that follows craftsman deaths includes loss of specialized knowledge and production capabilities, while the skill consequences that affect communities may include both immediate production problems and long-term knowledge loss that affects community capabilities. The skill loss that occurs when specialists die includes both technical knowledge and production capacity, while the skill replacement that communities must arrange may require training periods that create temporary capability reductions. The relationship impact that follows individual deaths includes changes in social networks and family structures, while the relationship consequences that affect communities may include both immediate and long-term effects on social organization and community cohesion. The relationship changes that occur after death include both formal and informal social restructuring, while the social effects may include both strengthened and weakened community bonds that affect collective survival capabilities. The family impact of Viking deaths includes economic and social consequences that affect surviving family members, while the survival challenges that families face after losing members may include resource shortages and protection deficits that threaten family continuation. The family adaptation that follows individual deaths may require restructuring of work assignments and resource allocation, while the family survival that depends on deceased members may become endangered when essential contributors are lost. The economic impact that follows family deaths includes both immediate and long-term financial consequences, while the economic adaptation that families must make may include both resource reallocation and income replacement that affects family survival capabilities. The economic disruption that occurs when family members die includes both loss of income and increased expenses, while the economic recovery that families achieve may require significant time and community support. The labour impact that follows family deaths includes loss of work capacity and specialised skills, while the labour adaptation that families must make may include both work redistribution and skill replacement that affects family productivity and survival capabilities. The labour shortage that occurs when family members die includes both immediate and long-term work capacity problems, while the labour replacement that families arrange may require community assistance and extended adjustment periods. The protection impact that follows family deaths includes loss of physical security and social support, while the protection adaptation that families must make may include both defensive arrangements and alliance formation that affects family safety and survival prospects. The protection deficit that occurs when family members die includes both immediate vulnerability and long-term security problems, while the protection replacement that families arrange may require community cooperation and resource allocation. The emotional impact that follows family deaths includes grief and trauma that affect surviving family members, while the emotional adaptation that families must make may include both individual and collective responses that affect family functioning and survival capabilities. The emotional disruption that occurs when family members die includes both immediate grief and long-term psychological effects, while the emotional recovery that families achieve may require extended time and community support. The seasonal factors that affect death and disposal include timing considerations that influence preparation and ceremony options, while the weather conditions that occur during death periods may affect disposal methods and ceremony possibilities. The seasonal challenges that affect Viking death include winter conditions that prevent normal burial, while the seasonal timing may require preservation methods that enable delayed disposal when normal procedures become impossible. The winter death challenges that affect Viking communities include frozen ground that prevents burial, while the winter disposal methods that families must employ may include temporary preservation and delayed burial that requires extended body storage. The winter preservation that enables delayed disposal includes techniques for maintaining body condition, while the winter storage that families arrange may require specialised facilities and preservation methods that prevent decomposition during extended storage periods. The summer death challenges that affect Viking communities include accelerated decomposition that requires rapid disposal, while the summer disposal methods that families employ may include immediate burial or cremation that prevents body deterioration. The summer preservation that enables funeral preparation includes cooling techniques and rapid processing, while the summer timing may provide optimal conditions for elaborate funeral ceremonies that would be impossible during winter months. The seasonal resource availability that affects funeral activities includes both natural and human resources that vary by season, while the seasonal limitations that families face may include both material and labour shortages that affect funeral quality and elaborateness. The seasonal funeral resources include both natural materials and human labour, while the seasonal constraints may prevent families from providing appropriate funeral recognition during certain times of year. The seasonal community availability that affects funeral participation includes both time and attention that community members can provide for funeral activities, while the seasonal demands that compete with funeral activities may include essential survival tasks that take priority over funeral participation. The seasonal funeral participation includes both active involvement and passive attendance, while the seasonal limitations may reduce community support for funeral activities during critical survival periods. The community resources that affect death and disposal include labour and materials that communities can provide for funeral activities, while the resource allocation that death requires may compete with other essential community needs during crisis periods. The community support that families receive during death periods may include assistance with preparation and ceremony, while the community resources devoted to death activities may reflect both individual status and community capacity to provide support during difficult periods. The labour resources that communities provide for funeral activities include both skilled and unskilled work, while the labour allocation that funerals require may include both temporary and extended commitments that affect community productivity and survival activities. The funeral labour that communities provide includes both preparation work and ceremony participation, while the labour costs that funerals impose may require community decisions about resource allocation during periods when labour shortage affects survival capabilities. The material resources that communities provide for funeral activities include both consumable and durable goods, while the material allocation that funerals require may include both immediate needs and long-term commitments that affect community resource management. The funeral materials that communities provide include both natural and manufactured items, while the material costs that funerals impose may require community decisions about resource sharing during periods when material shortage affects survival capabilities. The resource competition that may affect funeral activities includes conflicts between funeral needs and survival requirements, while the resource priorities that communities establish may include both formal and informal decisions about funeral resource allocation during crisis periods. The funeral resource needs that compete with survival requirements include both immediate and long-term commitments, while the resource decisions that communities make may reflect both individual status and community survival priorities that determine funeral resource availability. The community capacity that determines funeral support includes both current resources and projected needs, while the capacity limitations that affect funeral activities may include both immediate and long-term constraints that influence community ability to provide appropriate funeral recognition. The funeral capacity that communities possess includes both resource availability and organisational capability, while the capacity constraints may prevent communities from providing adequate funeral support during periods when survival pressures exceed community capabilities. As the northern winds howl across the frozen fjords and the long winter darkness settles over the land that claimed so many lives, let your mind rest on this sobering truth. You've just experienced what it truly meant to live and die in one of history's most unforgiving environments, where survival required skills, knowledge, and physical capabilities that modern people simply don't possess. You've walked through icebound settlements where winter lasted 8 months, and summer was a brief respite for desperate preparation, where the climate alone would kill you before you learned to fear the human predators who made survival even more precarious. The romanticised Vikings of modern imagination give way to the brutal reality of people whose entire culture was shaped by the constant threat of death from cold, starvation, disease, and violence. Medieval Scandinavia wasn't a land of noble warriors and heroic adventures. It was a killing ground where nature and human society conspired to eliminate anyone who couldn't adapt to conditions that would challenge modern special forces equipped with advanced technology. You've experienced a world where children worked like adults or died, where women faced all the dangers that killed men plus additional threats from systematic exploitation, and where social status determined whether you starved quickly or slowly during the inevitable famines. But perhaps most sobering is the realization that these weren't exceptional circumstances, but the normal reality for people who built a seafaring culture that reached across oceans, while most of them never lived to see 30. The Viking achievements we admire today, their ships, their exploration, their art, were created by people who faced daily survival challenges that would overwhelm modern populations despite our advanced knowledge and technology. The Vikings who conquered seas and established trade routes across continents did so while operating under survival constraints that would paralyze modern expeditions. They navigated by stars they could rarely see through northern clouds, sailed in ships that would be considered death traps by modern standards, and established settlements in environments where a single mistake in winter preparation could kill entire communities. Understanding Viking reality helps us appreciate not just how far human civilization has progressed, but how remarkable it was that any complex culture could develop under such hostile conditions. The idea that people could create poetry, art, and sophisticated social systems while facing constant threats from environmental extremes and human violence demonstrates capabilities that modern comfort has allowed us to forget. So as you drift towards sleep in your heated home, perhaps feeling grateful for modern medicine, weather forecasting, and the basic assumption that you'll live to see old age, remember the Vikings who built a civilization while knowing that each winter might be their last. Their survival wasn't guaranteed by technology or social systems. It depended on personal capability, community cooperation, and the kind of mental toughness that modern life rarely develops. The magnificent longships that still inspire us today were built by people who knew they might die before the vessels were completed, sailed by crews who accepted that each voyage might end in drowning or enslavement, and navigated by men who understood that the horizon they sailed toward might hold death rather than discovery. Tonight, as you rest in comfort that Vikings could never have imagined, remember that the progress we take for granted was built on recognition that survival should not require the extraordinary capabilities that Viking life demanded. The social systems, medical knowledge, and environmental technologies that protect us today represent humanity's determination to make survival less dependent on individual strength and more dependent on collective knowledge and mutual support. Sleep well, knowing that your tomorrow will bring challenges that are manageable rather than potentially fatal, opportunities that don't require risking your life, and the simple luxury of assuming that competent, well-fed people with adequate shelter have built the systems that protect you. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be everything that Viking sleep never was. Warm, safe, and confident that dawn will bring another day rather than another test of your ability to survive in a world designed to kill you.